to another video. In this video, I would like to discuss a new method of treating emotional distress disorders, which is what I would consider to be the true nature of what is considered a mental illness at this particular point. And now when we see emotional disorders or emotional distress disorders, which are the core developmental place where these emotional or mental conditions develop. If we wish to heal these particular conditions, the true core value or the true fundamental purpose of the therapy should not be to take away necessarily the scar itself, but to simply heal the point so you may return to a normal function. The scar is part of the healing process. But in order to return to the natural healing, you now need to basically also induce a work in process. A rehabilitation of sorts, if you wish, which for individuals that deal with emotional distress disorders, such as bipolarity. Now let's imagine if I was to, under a slight increase in their mental state, and now I induce a music therapy of sorts. You would now see that in the train of thought, as the individual expresses the emotion, a particular song they might wish to sing or feel an emotion placed within a song that resonates within them, you would now see that as the person sings a song, whether it be good or bad, it does not matter. To the point they feel that vocal resonance is the emotion attached to that song. And releasing that emotional resonance through the vocal cords, the person essentially finds that they are actively pulling that emotion or the thought process attached to that emotion. And the moment that they lose the train of thought by freely flowing based on the memory they can remember of a particular song, the moment the person's train of thought cuts off at that particular song is the moment the emotion cuts off within themselves too. Because we now must understand that for every emotion is a thought attached to it. And if we can separate the emotion from the thought rather than the thought from the person, then we can get to the true deeper core of things. And so now when we go into the idea of treating through something like a music-induced, slightly psychoactive therapy, where you dig into a deeper rooted experience in the emotional level of the individual, you'll find a deeper resonant emotional level in that rooted experience. Any psychoactive substance causes a pull back into a more primal function that we as humans experience. To a certain degree, if you're not tripping out, you are tripping in, if you may understand the experience now, because you're simply either changing the external world you experience or you're changing the internal world you experience. And through an mild inducing, such as say mild CBD, that's as mild as I'm talking here. Not as something as a mild, slightly induced LSD microdose. That is too powerful at that point. And the idea of inducing a slight CBD, which in itself is an antipsychotic property, but it also carries a slightly induced mild THC. So what might that cause? Well, you might say that that completely goes against the current modern state of what we believe. Yes, because your current modern state believes that you must cut the thought away from the person rather than separate the emotion away from the thought, so that the thought may not repeat itself in the person. And now when we look that the modern model has not been written on a way to actually benefit a person, it's simply meant to create a business so that a person may continue repeating treatment after treatment after treatment after treatment. If a person truly wishes to heal from an emotional distress disorder, I would encourage them to seek out a musical therapy of sorts. Whether you learn to play a musical instrument, whether you learn to sing, whether you learn to play the drums, any type of musical instrument that requires you to invoke resonance in your experience, which in itself is a rooted primal experience. We could invoke greater power using music. This resonance in itself is another form of an echolocation, because you're not pulling the thought from inside and putting it outwards. This time you're pulling the outwards inwards to dematerialize the thought, if you wish to understand the perspective. So you basically rid yourself of that emotion attached to that thought, which itself has caused you the emotional distress of that disorder. In a psychoanalysis of an individual suffering, whether it be bipolarity, schizophrenia, or any other mental disorder caused by an emotional distress disorder as a result of maximum levels of, well, it's basically the person lives under a constant state of adrenaline at that point, which over time causes a person to develop a heart condition because they're constantly under a higher state of survival. They have yet to release the emotion attached to the fear of the thought they experience. And when we can pull away from that, we can see a huge change in a person's livelihood. Because we're now not just putting a band-aid and saying, okay, you're good to go. We're no longer just putting a band-aid over the wound. Now we're actually causing it to start functioning again. And if the mind is something that which we cannot see, but we can feel, then we cannot treat it by treating something we see, which is the body. You have to treat the mind by treating that which you cannot see, which is your emotions. And in treating emotions, you have to learn to invoke that which resonates with emotion, which oftentimes is your voice, your vocal cords. And when you can find a way to increase or invoke the emotion you feel by using your vocal cord, and when you get to your vocal cords and you use that emotion as you're singing along to a song, you are simply trying to go from start to finish based on your memory. Not by listening to it, but based on your memory, because your memory is where the core of that emotion is stored. And based on the memory, the moment the person sings and finds a break in the pattern of where that song cuts in their memory, you'll find that they're actively pulling that thought or that emotion and separating them again, where you cut the thought that attaches to the emotion. And now you can actively see a person heal. Because if the person no longer feels that emotion based on that thought, then their mind is no longer something they fear all the time. And when we see this particular aspect of medicine now, which is not in the idea of creating profit, but in the true idea of creating healing, then we basically see the true teachings of real medicine, which is to actually heal people rather than to basically make business off of experiments. Anyways, folks, thank you for watching my talk on the mental distress disorders or emotional distress disorders. I hope that was helpful, and I hope we begin considering these particular practices going forward. Until next time, thank you.